and so on and so forth, and all these kind of trite messaging, um, you know, sound bites that don't mean anything, because employees are smarter than that. They realize that if you say everybody belongs here, nobody belongs here. And that's kind of one of my catchphrases is everybody belongs, nobody belongs.
Your business's success depends on relationships, relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they all have in common? They're all human. Because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Karl Pontau. Each week, I'll bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing business and daily life. This week, I'm excited to connect with Dan Berger. Dan is an Israeli American entrepreneur. His newest venture, Assemble Hospitality Group, is a lodging concept for corporate retreats. He previously founded and led Social Tables, an event planning software company, which was acquired by Blackstone-owned Cvent in 2018 for $100 million. Dan is a recipient of numerous industry awards, including the Pace Setter Award from the Events Industry Council. Dan holds a BA from Hunter College and an MBA from Georgetown University. His book, The Quest, The Definitive Guide to Finding Belonging, will be published by Forbes Books later this year. He lives with his wife and daughter in Boise, Idaho. Congrats on The Quest and welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Thank you, Karl. I will say that the book has come out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear it's come out. So I'd love to dive into that more because I think there's something that a lot of businesses are struggling with is creating that sense of belonging. So what are the steps that are required for building belonging?
Sure. So I think the first question someone has to ask themselves, by the way, it's nice to be with you. And I love the angle of your show. I think it's exceptionally important to understand first and foremost, and usually by the founder or the owner or the operating team, is do we even want people to feel like they belong here? And the reason you have to ask that question is because so many businesses may just want a transactional relationship with their employees. Maybe they just kind of want a clock in, clock out type of thing. And I think COVID has made a lot of employees realize that they don't necessarily want to belong to an organization. They just want their paycheck. So I think it's really important to, first of all, decide whether you want belonging. And I think, again, different companies, different industries, different products have different kind of belonging needs. And that being said, assuming you want belonging in your business, then there is pretty much a 5-step framework to get there. The first step is to create a culture of hospitality. And what that means is it's a welcoming environment. It's an environment where you can kick your shoes off, feel the warmth in the air, and then people feel, at home, if you will, or comfortable enough to be themselves. And as a result of that, you get to step 2, which is safety. Employees feel safe to kind of be vulnerable, take their shoes off, kick their feet up, and really kind of show up as they wish. The third step is to have engagement. And that means making sure people feel valued, people feel seen, people feel solicited for their advice, that their advice is listened to, and that's how you get engaged folks. And as a result of that, you get to the 4th step, which is commitment. After people are engaged, they're committed to the organization. They see that it cares about them. And that's how you get to the 5th step, which is belonging. And then you do things to reinforce that sense of belonging.
And so where do you see most companies that do want to create a sense of belonging? Is there a most common area that people kind of falter at or make some common mistakes that they make along the way that disrupt their ability to create belonging?
The first one is kind of bullshitting their way through it and saying everybody belongs here, you belong here, and so on and so forth, and all these kind of trite messaging, sound bites that don't mean anything, because employees are smarter than that. They realize that if you say everybody belongs here, nobody belongs here. And that's kind of one of my catchphrases is everybody belongs, nobody belongs. And yeah, you see that a lot in corporate America, where they try to make every employee feel a sense of belonging. And the reality is that some employees are not going to feel a sense of belonging, and that's okay. And this may not be their place. So I think the same is true for the word community. It's thrown around so much. You buy a Cuisinart toaster and suddenly you're part of the toast community. It's been really taken way out. It's really been overused and it's completely disingenuous at this point. And the way to create a community is to be selective about who you bring in, and be deliberate about who you ask to leave, and then also make sure that there's multiple things that people in the community have in common. That's very important. Otherwise, like I said, if everybody belongs, nobody belongs.
And so when it comes to building a genuine community, what are some of the, like what, I imagine you have some success stories about how you've helped people build these sort of the sense of belonging, a genuine sense of belonging. What's a time that you applied the steps you go over in the quest and it had it really be successful?
Yeah. So just to be, incredibly clear to the audience, like I'm not a consultant. I'm not like any of these things. I don't charge for time. Like that's not my shtick. I'm not a service provider by any means. I wrote the book because I never had belonging in my personal life, and being an adoptee, being an abandoned child by his dad, being an immigrant when I was 9, all these things made me feel belongingless. And as a result, I wanted to fill that void for 43 years, the time I'm alive. And I realized actually there's a process to doing this. So my biggest piece of advice is people can't create belonging without experiencing it themselves in their personal lives. So you can't go to an organization and say, hey, everybody belongs here, when you actually don't have a feeling of belonging or a sense of belonging outside of work. So my first piece of advice to anybody is to figure out how they get belonging in their own lives. And I would challenge everybody to actually facilitate your employees, your team members, to seek belonging outside of work, because that relieves the pressure from the leadership team or the management team of having to create this belonging, which oftentimes comes off as insincere.
So tell me more about that, the recommendation you just made of encouraging employees and people to seek belonging in other places besides work. So tell me more about like how you've done that, or what that's like, that people can, if they're seeking that, can try and apply that to their lives.
Yeah. I mean, you're asking exceptionally pointed questions, and I appreciate it greatly. It's actually quite simple, Carl. What people need to do is first, they need to imagine what I call the belonging fuel tank. And unlike any fuel tank, this thing takes all kinds of fuels. It doesn't matter what kind of fuel you're putting in, it works. And the fuel is your belonging strategy. It's how you find belonging. And in the book, I read about 30 or 40 different belonging strategies under 6 categories. The 6 categories are interpersonal relationships, group membership, casual encounters, these kind of micro interactions we have with people or colleagues or vendors, parasocial bonds or one-sided relationships that can be with characters in novels and movies or influencers, contemplative practices, and self-esteem activities. Each of these categories help people find a sense of belonging. And like a fuel tank, you take a bunch of fuels in order to fill it up. Depending on your personality, you need different fuels. And I help kind of any reader or anybody who goes to belongingquest.com/quiz, they can go ahead and figure out their personality and get a guide for how to find belonging based on their belonging personality. So step 1 is identifying your current fuel tank. Step 2 is figuring out your personality. Step 3 is matching your personality to the right fuels. And step 4 is assessing the fuels that you currently use or adding new fuels based off of what works best for you. And then there's a way to sharpen your ability to find belonging paths through a skill set that I put together called Belonging Intelligence. And there's 5 skills there. So
that's I didn't realize there's a quiz you could take for that. That sounds really interesting. I want to check that out myself after we finish recording. And I think it's something that I think there's such a lack of belonging in society. People just don't feel like they have a place. And so I think it's really important that people can find out what is going to work for them, because there is no one size fits all for this sort of thing. Everyone is very different when it comes to what they find fulfilling. And I like that you even included like books and the kind of the one-sided relationships, because that does have some value to it that people might not have considered to be a way of building belonging or being part of like a community that way. And it's stuff that I think really mirrors or kind of shows a contrast with the disingenuous belonging community stuff they see a lot of corporations or companies do, where it's in name only and doesn't really actually fulfill any real value, because it's they're trying to include everyone, and if people in the company have all different kind of results from this quiz, then they're not going to have the same experience. They're not going to feel the same way. That it doesn't actually really build it. So I can see how what you're built here, or your framework, you have individuals have to go through this and understand what's going to work for them.
Yes.
And then that'll help them find that the work groups, even like groups in work, like maybe not the entire company, but like in a department, whatever,
Exactly.
they might be able to find more belonging there, or like, and then finding that sense of belonging in other areas that's not just a work related thing. So I really like that aspect of it, because it is, even though all humans need belonging, not all ways of belonging are the same. And so I hadn't really ever taken it to that level of granularity yet. But now that you mentioned it, I was like, well, duh, that makes so much sense. And so with is there a way that you like recommend that companies, or like if there's a group, have you like talked about like kind of getting this sort of quiz, these sorts of insights into people's personalities applied on like to a business setting, or like what are some ways that like the people can apply the stuff they get from this quiz?
Yeah. So excellent question. I have a bonus chapter in my book that talks exactly about this. So let me give you some examples. So everybody knows about the languages of love, physical touch, quality time, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like that, even though it's an interpersonal framework for how couples get to know each other and show love to one another, it can be applied to work. Physical touch is a high five. Words of affirmation is like giving positive feedback, and so on and so forth. So much like that, belonging paths can be applied to the workplace. I'll give you an example. You just touched on one-sided relationships. So that's very important with a leadership team, to make sure that there are ways to get in front of the leadership team without needing a one-to-one, one-on-one every week or something like that. That's one very specific example. Another belonging path is self-esteem. Well, that's what company recognition programs are for. And there's different ways to do that in an authentic manner. I'll tell you the thing. It's like I have a neon sign in my daughter's bedroom that reads, "You belong here." If I had that in my lobby of my hotel or of my, corporation, that would be complete baloney. But if it's my daughter, so it's about the context that really matters when you talk to people in that kind of, intimate way, if you will. Other examples for our interpersonal relationships, like we have to have these close bonds with people. And for example, that could be making sure there are ways for colleagues to meet and develop relationships, because some of their best relationships, even romantic partnerships, started at work. So making sure there's that the workplace is a platform for belonging. It's not the source of belonging. The workplace is a platform for belonging. It's not the source of belonging. So in other words, a place to make friends, to be part of groups, to be part of industry associations, but it's not a replacement for how we find belonging in our lives.
I love that distinction. I'm so glad you repeated that, because I think people assume that they'll, just by being hired by a company or working somewhere, that they'll get that sense of belonging. And it's by reframing it as the platform for where the belonging happens in the way that works best for an individual. The individual still has to have, and there's a lot that the company has to provide the right platform features to facilitate the belonging to happen, but it's up to the individuals to engage with the platform in a way that builds belonging in the way that they need to. There has to be that contribution from both sides. And I think it's it's a very interesting insight. And I like how it makes it from just like, oh, it's a company's responsibility to create a sense of belonging, but it's more about giving people the opportunities to create belonging with people in the way that they are interested in creating belonging, but they still have
Yes.
to put the effort in as an individual. You have to contribute to it to fuel your own tank the way you need to have it fueled, and not expect other people to do it all for you.
Yes. And I will say another one of my kind of favorite sayings is, belonging is a function of a good belonging. So two things. Number one, DEI is smart corporate strategy. Belonging is a feature of a great corporate culture. And when it comes to setting a belonging culture, it's up to managers, not up to HR, because you can't leave something like everybody belongs to HR of 100 people, 1,000 people, or even 30 people. It's up to the teams to manage, to the team's managers to make sure that happens, because belonging happens on a small team, not at a giant organization.
Yeah, I know, like from the scientific standpoint, that our brains can only really know about 150 people tops before we just can't physically, our brains can't hold that many relationships. And so if you're at a huge company, you're not going to belong to the entire company. You're going to belong with your team, and it's up to the manager or like the direct report, or for the team that's going to set the tone. And I know when I saw an article earlier this week about how overloaded and burnt out a lot of middle managers are, and so it's no surprise that there's this lack of belonging, because the people at the company that need to be in charge of setting the tone and building these teams and building the sense of belonging are burnt out and leaving, and it's like there's this kind of collapse of the system and when it comes to how teams are run. And so it makes total sense that there's the lack of belonging in the workplace, because the people that need to be in charge of building those relationships are burning out. And so by default, the companies will say, oh, HR can just say everyone belongs, and that's the problem solved for all. And it's like, but that doesn't work. And so that it makes full sense why there's these issues happening in the workplace, especially at these larger companies that have like multiple layers of managers are feeling this pressure. So that's very interesting to see how that all fits together. And so it sounds like companies that do want to create a sense of belonging, that want to apply it in a way that's genuine and not just the lip service. One of the things they could be doing is better supporting their kind of team leaders and middle management, free up their time and energy and brains power so they can build the better kind of atmospheres and relationships that facilitate belonging, because just slapping "you belong" like the neon sign in the entryway is not cutting it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I love that insight. So the book's out. Where can people find the book? Where can I
Amazon?
find
Yeah,
the book?
Amazon. Yeah, so it's you have to look up Dan J. Berger. There are a bunch of Dan Bergers, so Dan J. Berger or belongingquest.com. If anybody contacts me, I can send them a few free chapters. Happy to do it.
Yeah, I'll definitely put a link in the show notes. Thank you so much for connecting with me today, Dan. If you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection podcast, please leave a review, and share it. If you'd like to connect with myself or Dan, check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.
Thanks, Karl.